What's up everyone, Thralls Metal here once again. I'm Necrotic, and I have yet another collection update for you. Now, this one is specifically from one distro. We went to indie merch, and I was on the hunt for mostly stuff from Transcending Obscurity, just because it's kind of difficult to get their stuff here. The label's based out of India, so I have to look for distros that carry their stuff. And indie merch was carrying a fair amount, unfortunately. Got there a little bit late and they were sold out of some I really had my eye on. But of course, me being me, I found a lot of other stuff, and having no impulse control is dangerous on a site like that. So I have yet another giant stack of things I picked up just because I was missing them, or I jammed them and I ended up really liking them. So I'm just gonna get right into this. Bodyfarm, The Coming Scourge. This was this Danish death metal band's second album. Came out on Cyclone Empire, but I believe it was distributed through Metal Blade Records. Now, I reviewed their last album a while ago, and I really kind of got into their sound. It's really an interesting style of death metal. It's kind of like old school death metal meets melodic death metal. Kind of comparable to a mix between Hypocrisy and Gorefest, like early Gorefest. Well, earlier Gorefest, like more like Erase, where it had like a little bit more groove to it. This is very old school, very stripped down. The production reminds me a lot of Hypocrisy, especially. Very hook laden, loads of riffs. I really think this is kind of like a stepping stone in between melodic death metal and just straight up old school death metal. All the groove and all the kind of death metal, like heavy, dark moments, but you still have a ton of melody on here. I particularly like the vocal delivery. Unfortunately, their frontman, Thomas Wolters, passed due to cancer a few years ago, and I believe they are going to continue on without him, but he definitely wrote some caliber stuff. I believe he was the main songwriting force in the band, so I am curious to hear what they continue on with in terms of continuing on with this sound, maybe forging a new sound. You know, the future's kind of open for this band. Solid album, definitely a band worth checking out if you love old school death metal and melodic death metal. Again, it's kind of a bridge between the two. Definitely check it out. Depravity, Grand Malevolence. This is the second album from this Australian death metal band, not to be confused with the Swedish Depravity. This is very different. Holy Jesus wept, these guys sound like Suffocation. But it's a little bit different, but I think Suffocation is a big influence on here. They have all those big palm muted chugs. The drums are particularly just nasty. They even kind of have that Mike Smith style blast beat where it's just insanely heavy. Now this actually opens up into a giant upside down cross, but I'm not going to open up because this is just, it's a pain in the ass. But I mean, even if you don't like the upside down cross, you can just turn it upside down or right side up. Either way, they intended to be upside down, it's correct. As technical as it does get, this is still more brutality centric. The vocals are great. They don't get too like pig squealy. It's mostly just a really low roar. Again, very similar to Suffocation. I would also say Blood Red Throne is very comparable too. Very fast, high-octane album with loads of groove. And there's great pockets of melody on here. Cantankerous Butcher, which I definitely appreciate the fact they use the word cantankerous. No one uses that. That's a really cool one. But it actually has some almost mellow death moments on it, granted with all the brutality of, again, Suffocation worship. This is an absolutely killer album. It came out last year, and honestly, if I had listened to it last year, this might have screwed up my year-end list, because this one is really, really good. I'm super glad I picked this up, and yeah, this is an absolute banger. If you're looking for something insanely brutal, check this out. It's a monster. All right, we have a couple from Coffin Dust. We have their first album, This Cemetery, My Kingdom, and their second album, Everything is Dead. This is a Philadelphia-based death thrash kind of grind. It sounds a lot like Exhumed, and there is kind of a reason. The main songwriter and guitarist actually played live with Exhumed for a bit. Maybe that had an impression on him. I don't know, but it definitely does sound like it. This one is definitely more raw. In fact, the production here is really gritty. The bass sounds absolutely disgustingly heavy on here. And it really kind of stands out in the mix. It's very out in front, like you're not gonna miss that. Lots of thrash influence, though. I think the biggest sound on here is just straight up old school death metal. Feels like Pestilence with like heavier vocals, and you get the alternating vocals between, I believe it's the bassist and the guitarist. I might be wrong, could be the drummer. But they're doing pretty much the Exhumed thing where you get one that does more of like a shriek and then one that does like a low gurgly vocal. The song Saul Wolf kind of breaks out of what they're usually doing and brings in some very like southern metal riffs like Down or Pantera. A lot of fun songwriting. Now this one is definitely more polished. The production I think is a lot better. The bass is a little bit further back in the mix this time, and I think the guitars sound less chunky and more of just like a solid kind of thrashy guitar tone. This one peppers in a really cool synth intro and outro, very John Carpenter-esque, which is a thing here lately. I'm not gonna bitch though, I love it. I love John Carpenter. I grew up on all his movies and his scores are brilliant. Now, I have to say, this one is a little bit different because the songs are longer, but this is the longer album. It definitely has more tracks on it. These are a little bit more tame. They kind of dialed back the kind of over-the-topness that was on there and just kind of went for more hooks. It's good, it just feels, again, kind of tame compared to this one. Now, I gotta say they did an absolute banging cover of Metal Storm Face of Slayer by Slayer. It absolutely rips. Killer track. Both these are pretty good. I would definitely recommend these if you like Exhumed, especially if you like Exhumed. They're very similar. Pretty fun listen to both of them. I think I like this one a little bit more just because it's a little bit more raw and gritty, but this one was still really good too. So yeah, definitely check them out. Depressed, Beyond the Putrid Fiction. This is their second album, came out in 2019 on Black Lion Records. This is a Brazilian death metal band, and this is fast, aggressive, very thrashy death metal, so not very depressing, actually, at all. Almost everything on here is fast blast beats, very thrashy riffs, reminds me a lot of Vader and Deicide. In fact, the vocals kind of remind me of Glenn Benton, though it is predominantly in his lower roar. You get some higher vocals sort of just kind of peppered in there every now and then to sort of break it up, but it pretty much stays in that low roar. There are bits of melodic death metal on here just in terms of the style, like there's some stuff in there that kind of remind me of like later Cataclysm. In fact, the vocal cadences seem to follow Cataclysm, which is kind of like non-stop vocals. That at least seems to be sort of Cataclysm's thing here lately. The production on here is decent. It's mostly just the levels. The levels are kind of odd because the guitars feel kind of back and the vocals feel super forward in the mix. The vocals need to be brought back a little bit, or the guitars need to come up. It just would fill out the sound a little bit better. But there's some really banging songs on here. Descending into Madness in particular, I really enjoyed that one. But there were some misses. Cult of Treason has some kind of cheesy sounding keyboards, and there's some weird backing screams in there that just didn't fit. But overall, pretty solid album. I definitely want to check out their first one and see if there's any differences, but yeah, pretty good stuff, and I recommend you check it out. Dira Mortis, Ancient Breath of Forgotten Misanthropy. This came out in 2020 on Self-Made God. This is the third album from this Polish death metal act that features current and former members of Devos, Azarath, and Blaze of Perdition. This is some nasty, old school death metal, and it is absolutely furious. The drumming on here is sick. It's just disgusting. I couldn't believe how fast this one was, because this kind of screamed a little bit more Death Doomy from the intro. Really cool vocal dynamics, and the really interesting thing on here is this does have an intro and an outro, but the songs are very long, and that kind of left room in these songs for dynamics. I believe most of the tracks on here are around the 7-minute, I think there's even a 9-minute track on here, but it doesn't get dull. It's not just like loaded with, you know, techie, nooling, and wankery. It's just solid songwriting and really good building of tension throughout. I actually had this on my radar, but I couldn't find it for a while, and lo and behold, I saw it in indie merch, and I was like, well, let's go ahead and get it now. It pretty much got me right away. Again, the 90s death metal feel. There's like a little bit of blackened atmosphere that kind of gives it an extra creepy factor. Absolutely killer album. I strongly recommend checking this one out. Again, long, fast death metal songs. They don't get slow and plodding. This is just high speed, high energy, almost throughout this entire listen. So yeah, definitely check this out. This is a legit banger. Ghoul, intermediate level hardcore. This is a EP the band put out of just hardcore covers, and it has an interesting theme because it's Ghoul. Ghoul's weird and fun. There's tons of self-aware humor throughout the entire band. You know, current and former members of Exhumed and Impaled, they're awesome. This is set up to be educational in the sense that it actually has like an intro with a woman speaking, that this is intended to be educational. Then after the beat, the song will start, and it's a series of covers. You get covers from Gwar, Fearless Iranians from Hell, Willful Neglect, NOTA, and Dayglow Abortions. I'm only familiar with, Gwar and Dayglow Abortions, honestly. But solid covers, they're really good. The problem with this is when it came down to like if I wanted to put this on my phone to jam or anything like that, that beep is after every single song and it's loud and it gets annoying. But I like it because it's part of the theme of it. It does come off as that cheesy educational thing, and it's fun, much like Ghoul is. That's just what they do. Ghoul's awesome at being fun and ridiculous. I own all their full lengths. I absolutely adore that band. So yeah, I don't know if it'd be like an absolutely necessary one in terms of all their releases, but it's an absolutely fun one, and again, that's what Ghoul's about, so definitely check it out. I Am Destruction Nascency. This is their 2020 debut full length, came out on Unique Leader, and I believe John may have had this on his year-end list. It may have been his #1. I can't quite remember because we make a lot of videos. But this is a Texas-based deathcore / death metal act. It really kind of lurks somewhere between the two. I couldn't say definitively it sounded just like every deathcore band or every death metal band. It's really kind of a blend of the two. After you get past the frankly disturbing intro where a dude is gutting some screaming chick, and I mean it's pretty graphic. I gotta give him props for really setting the tone with the atmosphere. This is loaded with dissonant guitars, pummeling drums. The production is pretty crystal clear. I mean, it does have some grit to it, but I think it comes across as very full sounding, and it's heavy. It's gigantic sounding. The riffs are gigantic. There's even some brutal death moments, maybe like kind of like some slam moments, but they don't overdo the pig squeals. In fact, the vocals are kind of all over the place. There's a lot of different vocal deliveries, high screams, mid-range growls, sort of a hardcore growl. They do a good job with that, but sometimes I think all the layering of them, it kind of gets a bit much. Now, this initially was a one-man project, which I haven't heard any of their other stuff before that, but man, this seemed like a lot for one dude to fucking take on, but if he could, bravo, that's pretty insane shit. But this has, again, like legit death metal moments and deathcore moments. It doesn't overdo the breakdowns, and it's very riffy. Lots of cool stuff on here. I don't know if I would have had this on my year-end list like John did, but this is definitely really good, and I had actually had this ordered a while ago, and unfortunately got canceled because I ordered right at the beginning of the pandemic, and well, yeah, nothing was getting shipped. But I got it now, and gotta say I'm pretty glad I did because this was pretty solid. So yeah, definitely check this out. Inculter, Persisting, Devolution. This is their 2015 debut on Edged Circle Records. This is a black and thrash band from Norway and features members of another band that I will get to later in this pile. This is very raw, very fast black and thrash, and I love the speed and energy on here. This is very similar to Hell Ripper. In fact, it's almost production-wise very similar to Hell Ripper's last album. The only thing I would say is this needs a little bit more bass, but the songwriting is tight. It's very simple. This is based on machine gun riffs, blackened atmosphere, and just pummeling drums. It's very simple drums. Like, he doesn't use the double bass a lot. It is almost kind of that static, thrashy beat, but it is always going fast, and for some odd reason, that was the thing that I really latched onto. Like, it was high energy all the time. Even when they kind of break into like a slower moment, it was always followed by something fast again. Now I actually have their second album, which I got first, Fatal Visions, and this is definitely different. Like, production-wise, this is way more raw, but also in terms of like the style, I think Fatal Visions is still like, black and thrash, but I think it's closer to like regular thrash. It doesn't have the fierce raw sound that this does, and I don't know, I kind of like this one maybe a little bit more. It's more simple, more straightforward, and I kind of like that, but I did like the follow-up too. It's just different, and it definitely makes me curious as to where they're going to keep going with their sound, because I like bands that kind of change it up a little bit. Sure, these guys could pretty much keep doing like the Hell Ripper thing and like the fierce nods to like early Slayer, but the growth has been pretty cool. This, though, I think might be my favorite of the two, but either way, both albums are cool, and I strongly recommend checking this one out. It's just fast and nasty, and it's going to make you want to move fast. In fact, I worked out to this, and I got done seemingly pretty quickly. Definitely check this out. Innards. Back from the Grave, Straight in Your Face. This is their debut EP. This is a 3-piece death grind act from Portugal. Now, the members are definitely in a lot of different bands, but I don't know any of them, and there were a lot, so I'm not going to go over them, especially since I don't have much to say about them because I don't know them. But I know this band. This is only a 3-song EP, and they love old school death metal and sort of like punky grindcore. In fact, I would say it's almost more like Autopsy meets Obituary. You get these big groovy sections that scream Obituary, but these punky D beats that might be kind of grindish, but honestly remind me a lot of Autopsy. Some fun vocal trade-offs. The intro is from Evil Dead. I love that movie. Definitely a lot of classic death like Scream Bloody Gore and Leprosy Worship on here. Not much else to say because this is only 3 tracks, but in terms of a sample size, this is pretty damn good and actually has me interested for a full length. I love the old school vibe. It's grindy, it's punky, it's thrashy, it's just fun and reminds me of everything I love about the 90s. So yeah, definitely check that out. Job for a Cowboy, Gloom EP. This came out in 2011 on Metal Blade Records. This is their 2nd EP overall, and I still like this band. There's still a lot of like hate for this band, but I still enjoy them. This was definitely post-deathcore. I would say this is no deathcore. There's no deathcore in here. This is pretty much technical death metal all over the place, but kind of in a controlled fashion. This was the last one to feature Bobby Thompson on guitars, and the second to last release to feature the Charn, John Rice, on drums, who is a really solid drummer. This band has a long history of turnover. In fact, I think the only original member is still John Davey, but he's a killer vocalist, and he's doing all sorts of crazy shit on here. The drum work, of course, is tight, and I think this was starting to get like kind of a bit of control when it came down to their wild style, because I think their second album kind of went off the rails a little bit. Like Genesis sounded a little bit more tight. Granted, it was a little more simplified, but this started to hone it in, and I believe the follow-up Demonocracy was definitely an improvement even upon this. But this was the only one I was missing from. It's kind of hard to find. I was in fact kind of surprised to actually see it there, so I snagged it, and that's pretty much it. So kind of rounded out my collection of Job for a Cowboy stuff. So yeah, if you're a fan of the band, you might actually know this is pretty damn good, and if you're not, give them a chance. They're actually probably better than a lot of harsh reviews have said. Check them out. LLNN Loss. This is their 2015 debut on Pelagic Records. This is a post-metal slash hardcore slash sludge metal kind of hybrid. And I mean, it's kind of hard to describe, but know that it is very heavy, like deep, down-tuned, chunky guitars that seem to just keep rumbling minutes after you hit the strings. Like it's just endless amounts of reverb and ambient noise. Hardcore vocals. This almost sounds like a hardcore band's take on Neurosis or Isis, which, I mean, there was some early hardcore influence, but I'm talking about like the more post-metal stuff, like a hardcore band playing Times of Grace. Now, I actually own their last album, Deads, which I really, really enjoyed, and I think that one definitely was more to the side of post-metal. A lot of the atmosphere in there just kind of screamed more Neurosis, except like less hardcore this time. This still has all the hardcore elements. In fact, the vocals are a little bit more dry in here. They're more of just a straightforward hardcore shout. Whereas on Deads, they're like loaded in more like, you know, filters in terms of like distortion. There's always something going on in the background on here, and it's usually crackling noise or waves of dark synths. In fact, it really worked on the last track for some odd reason, Voyager, which is just this gloomy, ugly soundscape. But I found myself really, really enjoying that. But I enjoyed every track on here. I thought this was really good. And I enjoyed Deads a lot too. So, I mean, if you're looking for something that is just filthy and dark and kind of like Cult of Luna on a really bad day, definitely check this out. This is just ear-bleeding heavy in a good way. Check it out. Putrid, Burn the World. This is their 4th album, came out in 2017 on Metal Blade Records. This is a Swedish heavy metal act, and I always get these guys confused with In Solitude, who are also Swedish. That might have been part of the reason. But I have albums from both of them, and In Solitude ended up breaking up in 2015 or 16 or 17. These guys are still around and still churning out their brand of heavy metal, which I really like because it's dark heavy metal. It's really like heavy and kind of bordering on speed metal. So I don't know, kind of like Flotsam and Jetsam, but with like the darker moments in Iron Maiden's history. Actually, it kind of reminds me of like the Paul Di'Anno era, mainly because the vocals are very wild and sort of raspy, and this guy's range is really incredible. I like the heavier feel to it, because I mean that's kind of a thing with some heavy metal, is it's not particularly that heavy. It's more just heavier melodic rock in some respects. I like it. I love that stuff, in fact. I mean, it was kind of like the next step following the stuff that Thin Lizzy did. This feels dark and foreboding, like as dark as the album cover suggests. But even within all that darkness, it does not skimp on melodies one bit. The guitar work is fantastic. There's some nice longer songs in here that really just build up to big epics. Solid stuff. I need to go back and jam their older stuff. It's been a while since I've jammed that, but I really dug this, and this might be the catalyst for me going back and jamming the stuff. So yeah, definitely check this one out. Solid stuff. Reptilian, Perennial Void Traverse. This is their 2016 debut. This is a death metal band from Norway, and this is the band I was talking about with Inculter. This is where they share members. Two of the members of Inculter are in this band, and this is their take on really just kind of dark, almost blackened death metal. It has black metal moments, but it's more advertised as like old school death metal. Very all over the place in terms of styles. Like you get death doom, you get blackened death, you get more thrashy death metal. And I mean, with the vocal delivery, which is very similar to Martin Van Drunen, though I don't think they quite have the heft. It almost sounds like a, you know, screaming hardcore kid versus Martin Van Drunen. But musically, it's very similar to like a mix of Pestilence and Asphyx. What do they have in common? Musically, though, I mean, in terms of like the wild transitions, but some of them can get a little jarring. They remind me a lot of Obliteration, which those guys are particularly good. I had the pleasure of seeing them back when concerts were a thing, and they were absolutely amazing. Very similar in terms of the style, though I think the longer songs can kind of hamper them a little bit, because some of the movements kind of get cluttered in there. And at least according to Encyclopedia Metalum, there is an Aztec theme on here, which I really didn't detect, but hey, you got a unique theme, if that is actually correct. Pretty solid debut. I would definitely check out more by them. I'd like to see maybe the songwriting kind of get a little bit more focus on those transitions getting tightened up, and maybe like some more hooks, but I like the adventurousness of this release. So yeah, it's a pretty solid release, and I recommend checking it out. Repugnant, Epitome of Darkness. This is the lone full length from this band. Came out in 2006, actually I believe after the band broke up. And this is very interesting because I didn't buy it knowing who was in it. This features Adam Zars of Tribulation on guitars, and on vocals and guitars it features Tobias Forge, Papa from Ghost. Now they go by D.D. Sars and Mary Gore on this, but it didn't take me long to look up the pictures, and yeah, no, it's legit, it's Papa. Now, take that and dismiss it, or take that and roll with it. I mean, honestly, I don't mind Ghost. I think they're not necessarily a metal act, but more of a hard rock act, and they put on a killer live show, and I don't really mind them as much. I didn't like the last album as much as previous albums, but this is not that. This is raw, gritty, very punky, thrashy death metal. Definitely loads of like old school Swedish death metal influence. I would say even going back as far as Nihilist. Like this has such a raw, like almost demo quality feel. The guitars are really chunky, but the riffs are great on here. In fact, the opening riff just screams Black Sabbath, and then you're just getting pummeled with Dismember and Entombed riffs immediately after. The drum work is fast and furious, very Repulsion-esque. Like it kind of has like that little bit of like punkiness to it. Some of this I would even say is very comparable to Possessed and Death, and Tobias has a really solid like death metal growl scream on here. It's very good. You're definitely not going to hear him do that anymore, and I mean there's definitely a reason why this band's defunct. They've reunited a couple of times, and then, well, he's busy. Now, I'm not going to go too far into this one because since there's only one release and it is kind of an interesting, obscure release, you might save it for an actual retro review because I really dug this, and that's all I'm going to say. That, and of course, check it out, and we'll get to it at some other point with more detail. The Spirit, Cosmic Terror. This is the second album from this German melodic black and death metal act. Came out on AOP Records. This features former members of Dethroned and Agatha Demon, and this is gloriously awesome melodic black and death metal, like I just said. I really think this is one of those stepping stone bands for someone that's not into black metal or trying to get into it. John? Very similar to bands like Necrophobic or Dissection. This is so melody and hook centric. It's just gorgeous. Loads of dissonant melodies. The vocals aren't too raw and screamy. They're actually delivered very well on here. The production's solid, so you can't really use the whole, it's too raw for me. No, the production on here is great. Very riff-centric. The songs are longer with lots of dynamics in it, and the closing title track is a gloriously awesome instrumental. I loved their debut, Sounds from the Vortex. It almost ended up on my year-end list that year, but I think we were only doing 25 in 2018, and I think that's when it came out. But this is absolutely killer. Missed it last year, got it now, and it's absolutely awesome. So definitely check this out. And finally, we have Total Fucking Destruction, USA for TFD. This is the fourth album from this Philly grindcore act that features ex-members of Brutal Truth, namely Richard Hoke on drums and vocals. Actually, all three members contribute vocals, and I believe one of the members is also in Rumpelstiltskin Grinder. This is grindcore, pure and simple. This is very punky, thrashy grindcore that is loaded with interesting surprises throughout all 20 tracks, I believe, on here. There's sections with keyboards. It's very kind of goofy and self-aware. Their humor is very cynical. I mean, it's grindcore. It kind of should be. I gotta say, I really like the fact that there are a lot of dynamics within these short songs. Like, you can shift from thrash metal to punk to flat out almost kind of a death metal break for a while. These guys have been pretty solid, and, you know, I think Richard Hoke is one of the main reasons he's a grindcore mainstay. I kind of like their earlier albums a little bit better. I think I started with Zen and the Art of Total Fucking Destruction, but I really enjoyed Haters a lot too. This is still really good, and I believe they released something last year, which, yeah, I gotta check that one out too. But once again, they made an awesome grind album. It's loaded with just punk fits and snarled vocals, and I mean, everything you like about grindcore is here, plus a lot of cynical humor. I mean, hell, they even said send help at the back. Okay, I'll help them out by buying their album and telling people to check it out. It's good stuff. All right, well, that knocks out another one of these, and there is yet another stack from another distro sitting on my desk right now that I gotta go through. So I don't know when you're gonna see this, but you're gonna see it, and know full well that probably while you see this, I am working on the next one, and hopefully not losing my shit on another distro, which don't hold your breath on that. I was already on Hell's Headbangers looking at stuff that I was missing, and ooh, yeah, I got a problem. It's not that bad. It might be bad. Either way, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up, and if you are new to the channel, subscribe, because we do stuff like this all the time. We will catch you later.